You're listening to Runions Have Layers, the podcast where two siblings explore the many layers of life and mental wellness, where vulnerability meets strength and where every shared story is a step towards self-discovery. Join us as we uncover the richness of our experiences and find empowerment in every layer.
Welcome back. Today we are discussing how to overcome imposter syndrome and how to embrace our accomplishments. So for me, imposter syndrome, I feel like I've dealt with this quite a bit. And it's, as you reach certain goals and you attain the things that you're sort of chasing after in life, you start to feel, at least I started to feel like I wasn't, I don't know, like I was almost like living someone else's life, kind of. And how you are feeling like, oh, like maybe like, do I actually belong here? Is this my identity? And am I good enough to be here? That's sort of how it affects me. And as I've started to feel that, and I heard this term imposter syndrome, I started to look up and learn a little bit about it. And, so it's been, I feel like it's sort of becoming a more popularized phrase and term, especially in the last probably 10 years or so, and more people are talking about it and how to belong and shame and vulnerability. And like, I feel like that's all sort of tied in to this idea of imposter syndrome. How has it affected you and your life and how you identify with imposter syndrome?
I think for me, the biggest area that it has affected me is in my coaching work. Because I do a lot of coaching on things that help mental health, but I'm not a licensed mental health professional. So, legally and ethically, there are lines that I can't cross because, I cannot offer therapy without a license. And I don't even want to get into that area. But even with all the certifications that I've earned to educate myself and also my own lived experience for, over 10 years, I still sometimes feel like I don't know enough, or that people are going to think that I'm a fraud, or that, they're going to pay for this course or this coaching, package, and then not find it beneficial. And evidence shows that's not the case. Mm-hmm. I've had multiple clients, and, I've been doing this for so long. But yet sometimes I still feel like I'm not qualified to do what I do, even though I know that's not true. And even though there have been licensed mental health professionals who have applauded my work and who have said, this is amazing, I'm so glad you're doing this, and that validates me in the moment. But still, sometimes I get, in my head about my qualifications and whether or not I can offer this. And that's why I went to people who are in the field to say, like, hey, where am I crossing the line with what I'm offering and with what I'm teaching and how I'm working with people? And I'm not, but I still sometimes am concerned that it's just not going to be as effective. And I don't claim that I'm offering therapy ever, but it's like I'm more afraid of how people are going to perceive what I'm doing, even though I'm coming from a very honest place of integrity and from my own personal lived experience. That has been the biggest struggle for me, more than really anything else.
Yeah, and I think that imposter syndrome really inhibits like people starting to do something or pursuing something that they really are passionate about, starting a business. I mean, for me, starting a podcast, I've been wanting to do something like this for a long time, and not feeling like I don't have anything to say, or that no one wants to hear what I have to say, or that I don't have the experience or anything. And that could go with anything that you do: learning a new instrument, learning a new language, going to college, starting a new job, having kids, any of that. Having this feeling of like that you're not good enough. And I feel like for me, I mean, it definitely is tied to shame. And just to sort of simplify what shame is, it's like I did a bad thing versus I'm a bad person. And I think it's important for imposter syndrome specifically, is reframing that language. And when you're feeling that way, feeling and reframing that, I've done all of these things, I've talked to these people, I've gotten feedback from external sources. So it's not that I'm not good enough. It's not that I can't do this or that I don't deserve to be where I am, but that for some reason it's almost like we're stuck to this like person that we used to be, or that, maybe our childhood or how we grew up, maybe we didn't have everything, and like now we're in a better place and we have more privilege, more things, access to things, and we're still tied to that, like, 12-year-old person that we used to be, or even 10 years ago. And but we've grown since then, and we have to reframe how we think to where we are right now.
You know what? I never considered that before. I know that it comes from somewhere. It's not something that you just automatically come up with. But thinking back to about that time frame when I was like, well, I was teenager, between 12 and 17, all the things that I wanted to do, specifically because we grew up in Southern California, I wanted to be a model and an actress and a singer and, all those things. And I was never encouraged in the way that I feel like would have been helpful. And I'm not saying that that caused the imposter syndrome that sometimes I have now, but I didn't believe I could do anything I set my mind to. It was very contained within our circle at the time, like get a good job that has good insurance. And, not that we were discouraged from starting a business, but it was like, stay safe, stay in a safe bubble, And so I really struggled with that for many years. I wanted to write a book, and I also have wanted to start a podcast for a long time. And I didn't think I had what it took, because I just didn't have the confidence. I think that's a big part of it too. Knowing that you're able to, or whatever you're involved in at the time.
Yeah, I remember, playing drums my whole entire life. Basically, something I really wanted to do for basically my entire childhood was I wanted to be a professional drummer. And I remember people telling me, "Oh, you're never going to make money doing that. You're, that starving artist kind of mentality." And even as I was approaching going into working in theater as a professional, people were always like, "Oh, you're never going to make money. Oh, you're not going to be able to survive. You're going to be living on ramen your whole life," kind of thing. And that's just not true at all. It's completely false. And people can make a living. And I have built a career out of live entertainment and in the arts industry. And I know it hasn't always been that way. And I know that the industry has grown a lot and has, given a lot of opportunities. Like I have health insurance, and I have a 401k, and I work for one of the largest entertainment companies in the world. But not everyone has had that experience necessarily, but it does still, even though I have gotten to where I am, there are still many times where I'm like, am I good enough to be here? Do I belong where I'm at? And I still even struggle with that, even although I've accomplished where I have gotten to. So it's just kind of a weird dichotomy where you have this success, but you still are like struggling with your mentality of, am I good enough? And it just goes to show you that shame is such a strong emotion. It really can put you in a weird mental like state, and being able to get over some of those mental hurdles. So I just think it's really important to reframe how we're thinking about it. And you talked about how we think about it, and the self-talk and how we talk to ourselves is really important. And a lot of times when I am having a negative thought, I try to think of, how would I talk to you about this? Or how would I talk to a friend? How would I encourage them? Because most of the time we're so much harder on ourselves, and we would never talk to others the way that we talk to ourselves.
I say the same thing. I tell people, if I was in this situation, and if they're like being, really self-deprecating or really just mean to themselves, calling themselves all kinds of, now I'm an idiot because I always do, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, if I said that, how would you respond to me? You wouldn't call me an idiot. You wouldn't call me, all these names. And it's a habit, just like, we've talked about with so many other things. It's a habit to have to, get into about how you talk to yourself and what you say, because that's what's going to change the neural pathways in your brain, the rewiring to believe that you can do those things. I'm glad you brought up when we were younger, because that is one thing. And it was really kind of an unconscious thing. It wasn't like, oh, I know I had imposter syndrome, so I'm going to do this differently. But I have parented my kids differently than we were brought up. And one of the things specifically that I always wanted to do was encourage them to reach for the stars. I didn't want to limit them and say, oh, that's going to be difficult, or there's a lot of competition, or there's a lot of rejection, or, whatever. Those things are still true. But,
Mhm.
I wanted to give them an encouraging space. So like one of my kids came to me when they were like, I don't know, 10, and I want to start a YouTube channel. And I'm like, all right, let's figure it out. Let's get an inexpensive camera. And it never, they changed their mind and didn't want to do it. But I was like, I don't know anything about this, but let's figure it out. I believe
Mhm.
you can do whatever, and my youngest is also a drummer, and he's asked me multiple times, do you think I can do this professionally? I know it's hard. I know it's hard to break into that business, but yes, I do believe it. I don't know how,
Mhm.
I'm not psychic. I don't know how things are going to turn out, but anything is possible.
Mhm.
And so I think that that's also important, not only how we talk to ourselves, but like you said, the shame from, previously how we were talked to, or things that were said to us that became the tapes in our head that we believe about ourselves.
Mhm.
So it's very nuanced, and it's much deeper than just believing, yes, I'm qualified to do XYZ. It's so much deeper than that. There's so many layers.
Yeah, it comes down to identity for me. Like, how do we identify what kind of person do we think we are, and how do we approach the world in that way? And I feel like the imposter syndrome is really tied to not only shame, but identifying yourself as someone who is successful in whatever you're doing, and not, like I said before, it's the identity is so complicated. It's so complex. It's not complicated, but it is a complex sort of concept to where it is tied to our childhood. It is tied to all the experiences that we've had and everything we've picked up along the way. And we have to keep adding to that and then stripping away the things that we've either learned from or that we don't believe in anymore. Maybe our values have changed along the way, and letting those things drop off and kind of forget them. And I know that's easier said than done, but I think that is really what's important, and how we can move forward from getting caught up in this imposter syndrome is taking an inventory of where we are today. What do we believe in? What are our values? How do we see the world? What are our politics? All of that stuff is a part of our identity and who we are as a person and how we see ourselves and how we think of ourselves. And so it's yeah, just again reframing how we see ourselves is really important. But I just want to go back a little bit to like our childhood. And I personally never felt like mom and dad ever discouraged anything, because like they totally could have not let me play drums. They could have not let any of us learn music or play sports. Or I never felt like they never wanted us to reach for the stars, as you put it. I feel like they were a lot more realistic about, hey, like, we want you to do this, and if you are happy doing that, yeah, do that. But I felt like there was always this mentality of have a plan B. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to make this your plan A, that's totally fine, but always have a fallback plan, which is really great advice. Regardless, I think it's always good to have a backup plan. It's always good to have other options. But I never felt like there was ever no, you can't do this, or no, you shouldn't do this, or we don't support that. I felt like anytime I wanted to do something and I was really passionate about it, they were always really supportive of that. And I'm really grateful of that, because there's a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have done if they hadn't been. So, but I'm also the youngest, so I don't know
Mm-hmm.
how that plays
I was
into.
going to say I had a different experience. Not, and I don't mean it to be negative, because mom and dad they were, for the most part, always very they were very realistic, but encouraging. But the one thing that stands out to me, when I think I was 17, and like I said, I wanted to be a model, and I had this appointment with a modeling agency, and I can't remember who said it. I think it was dad. And it didn't, I don't think he meant it in the way that I received it, but it was a statement to the fact, like, you have to be pretty to be a model. You have to be thin, and you have to have clear skin. And I think he was just stating the obvious, but to me, it felt like you are not these things. You are not
Mm.
pretty. You are not, and I didn't have the emotional maturity or self-awareness at the time to ask, like, well, what do you mean by that? Or this is how I internalized that for a long time, because to me it didn't feel supportive. It felt like, well, you're not this, and you have to be. And now that I'm so much older and looking at it, I don't think it was ever intended that way, because I mean, I know our parents loved us, but that's how it sounded to me, and that screwed me up for a long time.
It's important to also say that you're the only female out of all of the kids too, and that parenting a girl, especially in the 80s and 90s, is very different than it is now. Like
Yeah.
the mentality, the awareness, the education, just the culture is different now, and I'm sure that you were parented very differently. That how to be a mom and how to rear children and things that females are supposed to do. And so
Right.
I feel like that for sure played into their parenting style, especially because our parents are boomers, and that also informs them and their childhood and their parenting and what they learned. So I think that's a very important distinguishing factor too, for sure, is to just like take that into consideration.
Yeah, I agree. And I just want to point out to the people who are listening that the statement that females are supposed to do was in air quotes. He
Mm,
wasn't actually stating that.
thank you for that. Yeah. So I think that, and I think that goes to even today too. I think that there's still a lot of that in play. And how do we look at different ways of like our language? How do we talk about things that people want to do? How do we support those things? And just getting back to the imposter syndrome, I think that identifying what those things might be for you, where you've come from, what your background is, when you were born, where, all that goes into how you see yourself, and identifying what those things might have been that could have informed how you heard things. Like you said that dad told you this thing, but probably didn't mean it that way, but he said it in a specific time, what was going on that time, and the whole body image thing. Like there's a lot of things to dissect from there that could have informed what he said and how you took it and like what you were going through in school. So it all ties into identity, and which is informing how we respond to this feeling of being an imposter and being a fraud, and how we don't feel like we're good enough.
And for me, and this also kind of illustrates the point that not only were we raised different because we're 9 years apart, but I experienced abuse younger, not from mom and dad, just to be clear, that you didn't experience. And so that also informs your identity and sense of self and body image and shame and all of those things that I had to unpack later as an adult. But I didn't even realize at that age when that was said to me. It's like there were so many more things that informed that decision of how I received it and how I felt other than what was said. But that is what sticks out to me, is it was the comment. But there was so much more behind that at the time that I didn't realize.
Yeah, 100%. It's, really, I think the best thing that anyone can do, just in general, and this goes for talking about imposter syndrome and shame and identity and self-talk and all of that, is to take a moment and reflect on the way that you grew up socioeconomically, educationally, the things that you experienced, both positive and negative. Try to put yourself back in that moment and remember how you felt, because there are certainly moments in time that you can close your eyes and go back to in a moment's notice, and you just can go there, And for me, when I hear specific songs, it takes me back to a certain moment where I remember those songs. And, I think that those things, like you said, it's like a tape that plays back in your mind. And either consciously or unconsciously, I think that sometimes things happen, people say things, and you go back to those moments and you replay those tapes of, oh, when that person said this thing when I was 15, that's bringing that feeling back up.
Right.
And we have to learn how to be aware of that when that happens, and to name and identify what that feeling is. Because if we don't start to notice and take an inventory and a look at what happens in those moments and when we have those feelings, they're always going to keep happening and coming up. We're not going to have the opportunity to take a new direction and to reframe what that feeling is, because we can't grow and we can't change and learn how to move on from that sort of feeling and to say, no, I do deserve to be where I am. I am smart enough. I have done all these things, And so if we don't start to name and really identify what that feeling is and address it, then it's going to constantly be nagging at us and constantly bringing us down, because we're letting it be there and letting it just live in our bodies.
While we're on the subject, let's talk about some strategies to overcome imposter syndrome. I'll share a couple that have helped me. But first, I want to expand a little bit on what you were saying. First of all, a lot of people aren't even aware. Like you said, you have to go back and think, back, in your childhood, what was said, or any time in your life, not always specifically childhood, but a lot of people don't even know that's where it comes from. They don't even have I don't want to say intelligence, but the awareness, because I didn't realize that all of the negative self-talk and all the negative stuff were tapes that were going through my head. I had to re-record those, so to speak. But one thing that I do, and what I tell other people to do, is to think about what you're thinking about. And when that thought comes into your mind, like, oh, I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, who told you that? Like, where that belief came from somewhere. So go back in your history and try to remember the first time, or if it was said multiple times, or if a teacher told you, oh, you'll never make it. I've heard stories like that too. Thankfully, I didn't have that from teachers, but the thought always comes from somewhere. So the first step that I tell people to take is try to identify where that was and realize that even though it's ruminating, going over and over in your head, you don't have to believe it. You identify where it came from and then rewrite the thought, say something different. And another thing that I heard somewhere else, I don't remember, but it does work, is to, when you're doubting yourself, to channel the person that you respect the most, or that is successful in doing that, imagine you have their ability and their intellect and their education and all those things. And I don't mean to be a fraud, but just to channel that energy, so to speak, of someone who is successful and has the education and all of that. And that helps you to feel more confident. What about you?
Some strategies that have helped me overcome the imposter syndrome is, honestly, it's sharing my experiences with other people. Whenever I talk to other people that are doing the same thing or maybe in the same position, I remember when I was in grad school, I had imposter syndrome for like the whole first year I was there, because first of all, I was going to like the best program in the whole country for stage management, and getting an interview was already like a shock to me. And then getting a second interview and them flying me out to the university and doing the whole thing, that was like, is this really happening? And then the third thing was getting a call that I had got accepted out of like 50 applicants. I was 3 of 50. And I was like, I was blown away that someone saw that in me and that I had the skills that they thought was high enough for that level. And so getting the acceptance letter was like, wow, like I can't believe this is actually happening. And then I got there and I was just like, it was such an elevated level from where I had come from, and the things that I was working on and everything. There's more money to work on the things that we wanted to do. Like everything was just kind of taken up like 10 levels. So I was just dealing with that and not really knowing how to work with that, and feeling like I wasn't good enough, and like I didn't have the training, and that I wasn't smart enough, and that I didn't come from very much, and that we didn't really ever have opportunities like this. And so I just felt like that was something I was constantly dealing with. And I shared an office with the people that I joined the same year with, and there was 3 stage managers. And a lot of times I would just talk to them, like, hey, are you feeling like this? Cause like, I feel like I don't understand this, or I'm not really getting this. Like, I feel like I'm not doing a good job. And they're like, no, you're doing a great job. Like everything is fine. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. It's kind of like going back to the vulnerability conversation we had. I think that is tied into it. And, letting people who are around you that trust you, that you trust, where you can have open conversations about the things that you're feeling, because they're going to reflect back to you. And that has really helped me to open up. And I mean, I even did that a few weeks ago with my coworkers, and I was like, I'm feeling a little weird about this. Do you feel like I came off the wrong way, or do you feel like are you feeling the same way? And they were like, no, like everything you did was totally fine. You're doing great. We're really, glad you're here. So I feel like that has really helped me to be more okay with the feelings that I'm having and sit with those and let them be what they are, because that's totally fine. It's just how are we taking that, and how are we responding to those, and how are they affecting us?
A couple of more strategies or things that I want to point out is that your brain believes what you tell it. So it doesn't know the difference between reality and imagination, or what you perceive to be reality. And that goes back to speaking to ourselves in a positive way. And then something else that I learned recently is that when you are talking out loud, so whether it's an affirmation or you're talking to yourself, or if you're talking to somebody else explaining what you do, you can't argue with yourself at the same time. And so that is another strategy. It sounds crazy, but just talking out loud to yourself and saying, I do have the qualifications. I am smart enough. I can do this. And that's going to help not only rewire those neural pathways and the tapes that we talked about, but you won't be arguing with yourself in your brain. And I do that a lot. I'm constantly thinking, and that has helped me.
Yeah, sometimes I do that as well. If there's something that I'm struggling with, or maybe I'm like a little nervous about, sometimes I'll just say, Brian, you can do it, and I just kind of like say that out loud to myself, or, these are the things you need to do, or, sometimes I just sort of walk through the steps of how to do it. A lot of times, like if we have something that we've changed in the show and I'm calling it for the first time and no one else has done it, it can be nervous because you don't want to fuck it up. And sometimes people's lives are in your hands, and you don't want to call it wrong. You want to make sure that everything is safe, and there's a lot of things to think about. And so it can be a very anxious moment, and just sort of thinking, okay, you know what you're doing. You've looked everything over, you've talked about it, you understand it. So sometimes right before that moment starts, I just take a breath and I'm just like, okay, you can do it. And that's it. And then I just go and I do it. And so I think just giving yourself that moment and freaking out maybe for a moment, and then taking a breath and then saying, okay, here we go, and going into it, that's really helpful for me.
And I also want to acknowledge that it's not like a one and done thing. You're not just going to say it one time and be like, oh, I'm magically, more confident, or I magically, think positively about myself. It's something that has to be done, creating a habit. We've talked about that, about multiple different things. And that really is what changes your mindset and your actions and your thoughts, is creating the small habits. And so that's why I wanted to give a couple of strategies that people can pick and choose from, just to start doing on a daily basis.
So we talked a lot about what imposter syndrome is and how it's affected us. And I think the most important thing to take away is that it's not something that is going to be solved overnight or in one day. These are things that have been with us for our entire life. And so we hope that some of these strategies are able to help you move forward and to address a lot of the things that you've been dealing with. But when you do feel the imposter syndrome and you feel like you're not good enough, that you're not the first person to feel this way. You're not the first person to have these feelings, that most people around you have felt this way in one way or another, and that you are being a human. That's what humans do. They feel, and so you're not alone, and you're not the only person. But thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to this episode, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.